Yes, welcome to this seminar on the genocide of Armenians 100 years ago. I'm very proud to present Vicken Cheterian, a lecturer, journalist, writer, and we will talk about the genocide that took place in the Ottoman Empire 100 years ago, and where more than 1 million, maybe as much as 1.5 million Armenians were killed, and also hundreds of thousands of Assyrians, Chaldeans, Syrians and Greeks. Those killings were on orders from the Young Turks in the Ottoman Empire, and they were executed through deportations, executions, massacres, and they resulted in an extreme despair, depression and hunger. And the Ottoman Empire was almost emptied of its Christian minorities. So why is it important to highlight this today? This is what Vicken Cheterian will talk about, how this open wound of this genocide affects us and the neighborhood of Armenia and the Armenians today. Welcome.
Thank you, Kristina. Thank you, everyone, for being here. So you asked the right question. Why should an event which took place 100 years ago concern us all together? By us, I don't mean necessarily Armenians. By us, I mean human beings. And I have two answers for that. One is that the Armenian genocide perpetrated by the Ottoman government, by the Young Turks who were in power, opens a new chapter in humanity, a very dark chapter. It's part of modernity, which is with us, and basically it's the first time when a state turns against one part of its own citizens. And the state thinks that it doesn't want that part of its citizens and tries to get rid of them through violence, through mass killings. And the second reason why it is important to us, all of us, is that it has been denied, it has been censored. This is not a small matter of censorship. It's a matter of censoring one of the major pages of modern history. I mean, just to give you some dimensions so that we know what we are talking about. In the Ottoman Empire, in 1914, when the First World War started, there were around 2 million Armenians. Now, Ottoman statistics say 1.5 million. The Armenian church has 1.9 million plus Catholic and Protestant Armenians, so it's around 2 million. At the end of the war, we have only 300,000 Armenians left in the empire. And from these 300,000, some of them, they are converted by force to become Muslim Turks or Muslim Kurds. We have, just to give you another statistic, we had 1,996 Armenian schools in Ottoman Empire at the time. Today in Turkey there's only 18 left. We had 2,538 Armenian churches and monasteries. Some of the pictures will be exposed there. Today we have only 34. So this is massive destruction. The number of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire at the time, it was equal to the number of the Syrians living in the Ottoman Empire. The Syrians today are 23 million. There's another catastrophe happening there. That's another subject, but it's not far from our concerns. Today, there's only 50,000 Armenians in Turkey. So this is really massive, massive violence. So probably you have heard about the Armenian genocide, and probably you don't know much more than that. It's not your fault. It is by design. It has been wanted to be like that. The Armenian question after the Lausanne Treaty, which created modern Turkey in 1923, was forgotten. The Turkish state has invested enormous energy, money to erase the memory. But it's not only the fault of the Turkish state, it is also the fault of the international community. Modern European states, American states, Middle Eastern states, who kind of collaborated with this denial of the genocide. By the way, Germany, this year, German parliament, German president, recognized the Armenian genocide. It also recognized German participation and responsibility in the Armenian genocide. This is 100 years later. So it means for 99 years, Germany was not talking about it. Why this silence? So, my book, the question I'm asking is, what happens to humanity in case there's a crime, major crime like this, and we close our eyes? Imagine in case you are living in a village and there's a mass killer. And instead of the police going and arresting this person, the police says, he's our hero. The mayor gives him medals. What happens to that village? What happens to the morality of that village? What happens to the political culture of that village? Or another dimension, think about Europe. Europe also went through a similar experience during the Second World War with the Holocaust. What would have happened to us, all of us in Europe? Not just the victims, not just the Jews, not just the Gypsies, not just the Russians and the Polish, to all of us, in case we pretended that that's okay, it didn't happen. And in case it happened, it was the fault of the victims. So I wanted to ask this question and see what kind of traces I find when I ask these questions. Because there are many books documenting the Armenian genocide, and I wanted to see what happened afterwards. So this is a history starting with the genocide and ending up to today. And when I started this work, I already knew that the suffering of the victims has continued. I'm Armenian myself. I was born in Lebanon. I grew up in typical Armenian diaspora context, so I knew all that. I knew that when there's so much injustice, basically you suffer personally from it, and you suffer as a group. And I knew that Armenians who were left behind in Turkey, they continued to suffer. They continued to be accused of being the enemy. And the Turkish state went on targeting minorities, Armenians, Greeks, Jews, who were living in Kemalist Turkey. For example, in the 1920s, Armenian property was confiscated in places like Istanbul. This wave of confiscation went on up to the 1980s. There are still struggles taking place in Istanbul where Armenians are trying to get back schools, church property, cemeteries, youth camp where, for example, Hrant Dink met his wife. It's up to now, it's a question of struggle so that they get back this property. So up to 1980s, this kind of confiscation went on. There were also pogroms in European Turkey in the 1936. There were anti-Jewish pogroms. In Istanbul, 1955, there were pogroms against Greeks, Armenians, and other minorities. All this was state organized. So, in case you don't call a crime, it goes on, it doesn't stop. Another example, when Armenia became independent, Armenia is neighbor of Turkey, Turkey went on having very aggressive policies towards Armenia. The border is closed up to now. Turkey imposes a blockade on Armenia, and one of the reasons is the history of genocide, the other reason is the Karabakh conflict. Now, what I discovered, which really astonished me, is that denial of a crime, denial of genocide, influences not only the victims, it influences also the other groups living in that society, including the state. And here I will mention two examples. One is that after the Armenians were massacred, deported, as well as Assyrians who lived in southeast Turkey, the Kurds, which up to then were considered to be part of the ruling population, and the state used them to for the massacres and deportations of Armenians and Assyrians. So once the minorities are not there, Kurds become the new minority. And the Kemalist Republic targets them as the undesirable group of people. So we see the first Kurdish revolts, because they came under heavy pressure from the state, in the 1920s, which ends up with the Dersim massacres in 1937-38. Maybe 20,000 people were massacred, more deported. So there we see that the Kurds become the new kind of minorities, and they are stigmatized by the state as the others. And you might remember that in Kemalist Turkey it was forbidden to talk about Kurds. Kurds didn't exist. Even their existence was denied. Speaking Kurdish was denied, was forbidden. And the state tried to assimilate them and to make Turks out of them. I mean, this is incredible violence in itself. Denying who you are, denying your name, your identity, your ethnic belonging. And today we see that this question has not finished. You know, up to now, the Kurdish question has not been addressed. And in case you open the news, you see that there are violent confrontation between Kurdish guerrillas and Turkish state police and army in the southeast. But the most amazing thing I discovered was that the Turkish state itself has kept this memory and it made it its own. To organize a genocide, it's not easy. It's deporting thousands and thousands of people. Christians made 20% of the Ottoman Empire in the 1914. At the end, they were nearly finished, Armenians, Greeks, Assyrians. So this was a huge number of people being deported, being massacred, their houses, property, churches being confiscated. So it needed organization. And there was a secret organization in Ottoman Turkey, which was behind this. This secret organization didn't exist in any legal form. It was called special organization, and it was the structure which had the real power within the state. And what happens when you pretend that the crime didn't happen, and in fact the criminals were heroes? What happens is that you attribute positive values to this crime. And in fact what happened in Turkey is that after the end of the First World War, this organization was never dismantled. Mustafa Kemal, who himself was a young Turk, he was an army officer coming from the same generation, he was member of Committee of Union and Progress. In fact, he used these people to organize his own revolt against the Sultan and against British and French occupying forces. So we have their continuity of the structure that was responsible in the massacres, in the genocide, which became the essence of the modern Turkish state. Probably you have heard the expression, the deep state in Turkey. It's that. Those who were responsible in the massacres, they are still surviving, both symbolically but also as an organization. So a state which never says that a crime is a crime, in case a state considers a crime to be something positive, what it learns, the state is a set of institutions, right? So what the state has learned in Turkey is that in case you have a political problem, using massive violence is efficient. It leads to results, so we can use it again. And this is what's happening. I want to conclude, I want to make it short so that in case you have any questions, we can have some minutes for that. I want to conclude saying that while writing this book, the major motivation for me was to learn and to know people in Turkey, Turkish people, who have become conscious about this incredible, important event in their history, and they started to write and to speak about it. And I personally met some of them. I knew them. They were my friends, in fact. People like Taner Akçam, who's basically the first Turkish scholar who started writing about these issues, starting doing research, starting from 1990. So in the last 25 years, he's writing about these issues. And he opened the eyes of many Turkish professors, intellectuals, scholars to this fact. The other person is Ragip Zarakolu, who was here. He lives now in Stockholm, basically. Ragip Zarakolu is the leading human rights defender in Turkey. He is a journalist and publisher, and his publishing house, Belge, published many translations and books about the Armenian genocide, as well as about the Kurdish issue, which only 15 years back was taboo in Turkey, as well as on the Greeks. So he is really another leading person who has done really groundbreaking and very courageous work, and for that he has paid enormous price. He has been to prison many times. His publishing house was attacked twice and with bombs. His wife was imprisoned many times, and she passed away because of that. In the last years, his son was imprisoned in Turkey, so that's why he left Turkey, because he suffered so much, and now it's been more than a year he lives in Sweden. And the last person I want to mention is Hrant Dink. There's the picture on the cover. I had the chance and the honor to meet Hrant many years back. And he's the first Armenian who had the courage to talk about Armenian issue in Turkey, who claimed the right to speak as a Turkish citizen about politics, and he spoke to the conscience of the average Turk with the language they understood. He wasn't a sophisticated intellectual, he was an excellent journalist. And he could place the Armenian issue on the Turkish public agenda. And for that he was also persecuted. He was taken to trials again and again. And in January 2007 he was assassinated. I think there's a biblical dimension. There's something really mystic in Hrant's life and in his death. Because the moment he was killed, he succeeded in bringing the message to the average Turk, to the average Turkish citizen. For the first time, 100,000 people went out to his funeral, and they took the slogans and they shouted the slogans, "We are all Hrant Dink, we are all Armenian." Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vicken Cheterian. Let's open up for some questions from the audience. Do we have any questions? Otherwise, I will take the opportunity to ask you a question, Vicken. I mentioned that before we started this lecture, this very interesting lecture, the fact that the Swedish Parliament actually acknowledged that there was what took place 100 years ago in the Ottoman Empire was a genocide. This year, the Swedish government has, instead of acknowledging that, they have said no. We will do an investigation. We will put an expert group on this and look what actually did happen here. What is your interpretation of this situation that we have? Because actually this year is the year of commemorating 100 years of the genocide. Instead of doing that, instead of sending a Swedish minister to Armenia to be part of the ceremonies, they actually instead put an expert group to investigate the situation.
I think very often politicians lack courage, and as I said, this is not just an issue of a minority being victimized. This is an issue of in what kind of political system, in what kind of political culture we would like to live. Do we want to live in a culture where we can't call criminals criminals, even after 100 years? And here I'm not just asking for justice. We are still asking for recognition, to be able to call things by their own names. And in fact, it is this kind of collaboration between European, Western, American, Israeli governments and Turkey, which Turkey denies genocide. You know, Turkey says there was no genocide, and in fact it was their fault. You know, they collaborated with the enemy, so there was nothing wrong happened, and in case anything happened, it's the mistake of the victims. So, and this kind of discourse doesn't pass in case there's no collaboration on negationism taking place in Europe, in international organizations, on the level of the UN, by European intellectuals and so on. Why did we keep silence for so many years? And today we know that there's organic relation between one genocide and the next. For example, we know that there's organic relationship between the Armenian genocide and the Holocaust in Europe. For example, we know that during the First World War there were 12,000 German officers commanding the Ottoman army. So many of these officers brought the memory of this experience to Germany, to the Germany of 1920s, 1930s. Some of them became high-level officers. For example, you have heard about the Auschwitz concentration camp. Its longest commander, Rudolf Höss, in the First World War, he was a German soldier and he was serving in southeast Turkey of today. I mean, there are so many examples like this. And the fact that the whole debate about the Armenian genocide was hijacked by commissions like this, is it a genocide or not? I mean, how do you call that a people was living there? 20% of the population of the Ottoman Empire, minorities, disappeared after the end of the World War I. I mean, how do you call them? In case the word genocide doesn't suit you, give me a name, give me a word, give me a term. So it's not the question of the term, it's a question of us not being able to face the truth and not having the political courage for it.
I have a final question. Do you ever think the wounds of the Armenian genocide will heal?
Of course, it's difficult to talk about the future, but I hope. And I try to end my presentation by hope. And for example, in Turkey, for 90 years there was silence. But today, Turkish intellectuals, Turkish artists, Turkish scholars, journalists, more and more, every day more and more, they realize the importance of the Armenian genocide. Not for the sake of the Armenians, for the sake of everyone, for the sake of Turks, for the sake of democracy and human rights in Turkey.
Thank you, Vicken Cheterian. For the sake of humanity, we have a question here. Okay.
I'm a very creative person. I make films, I write novels, and one novel, the main character is Armenian, so I had to study a lot about Armenian genocide. But it's actually a bigger genocide because Assyrians and Greeks were also wiped out. Because if I'm not mistaken, before that genocide, Turks were only 40% or something like that in the Ottoman Empire. And I know, because of the propaganda, I know Kurds, and the Kurds were spared only because they were Muslims, right? Yeah. I just, actually not so much of a question, I just want people to remember the Assyrians and the Greeks who also suffered.
I think you came a bit late because we did mention both Assyrians and Greeks, and just like the Holocaust was not just about the Jews in Europe. The Jews were a major target of Nazis, but there were other groups targeted too. It was the same in the Ottoman Empire. The Young Turks targeted all Christian minorities because not only Christian, Yazidis as well. Yazidis are not Christian. And because they thought that they want to create a homogeneous new Turkish population, and they thought that those who were Muslim non-Turks, Kurds, Albanians and so on, they will be able to assimilate them. And they thought that the non-Muslim minorities, they will not be able to assimilate them. So we did not forget neither Assyrians, nor Greeks, nor Pontic Greeks. Thank you very much.
And for the sake, thank you for your point there, and we do acknowledge that, of course. It is very important. And for the sake of humanity, we have to realize and acknowledge and discuss and accept in order to prevent future genocides. Thank you all for coming, and I would like to add that we will actually have an extra seminar tomorrow morning here at 9 o'clock with Hans Linde, the spokesperson of the Left Party in Sweden, on this specific topic with Vicken Cheterian as well. So please come again, bring your friends and have breakfast with us discussing this. Thank you, and a big hand for Vicken.